You know the feeling. You walk into an old building, maybe a centuries-old cathedral, or maybe just some condemned tenement building.
Right, yeah.
And the atmosphere physically presses against you. There's this distinct density to the air.
Oh, absolutely. Like the air is heavy.
Exactly. And most of the time, we rationalize it, right? We blame the settling foundation or the trapped humidity.
Yeah, or the smell of oxidized iron and rotting plaster. Just normal physical things.
Right. But if we strip away the rationalizations, we're left with this concept of architectural memory.
Ooh, architectural memory. I like that term.
I want you to consider the mechanics of trauma, not as a psychological state, but as a literal physical output.
Okay, right.
Like, what happens to a physical space when it is bombarded with sheer, unadulterated terror for decades?
Yeah, does the stone, like, absorb the resonance of suffering the way wood absorbs moisture?
Yes, exactly. Imagine an environment so utterly saturated with pain, isolation, and violent despair that the architecture itself crosses a threshold.
It's a terrifying thought.
It really is. The bricks and iron don't just record the agony, they synthesize it.
They metabolize it almost.
Right. Can a structure of glass and mortar develop a malignant sentience simply because it has gorged on too much human misery?
Well, the underlying theory there touches on psychic resonance acting as a literal physical force.
Right.
In spaces where extreme emotional volatility is localized, and trapped, you aren't just dealing with events happening inside a room.
The events seep into the room.
Exactly. They seep into the material composition of the space. Think about the energy expelled during a lifetime of madness or sudden violent death.
Yeah, that energy has to go somewhere.
And if it has nowhere to dissipate, it compounds. It fundamentally alters the geometry of the space until the building, it ceases to be a passive container.
It wakes up.
Yeah, the foundation warps, the walls retain a memory of the trauma, and eventually the structure crosses a terrifying evolutionary line.
Wow.
It becomes an apex predator, basically, disguised as architecture.
Welcome to the deep dive in the Onyx Codex. Tonight, we do not steal gold or secrets. Tonight, we are trespassing in a place that claims the mind itself, the Shalebridge Cradle.
The shadows are particularly dense for this one. We are really looking at a masterclass in psychological disintegration today.
We really are.
Yay.
But before we get to the cradle, we need to contextualize the absolute institutional freefall that forces a cynic like Garrett into this nightmare.
Wait, because Garrett would never normally go near a place like this.
Never. You all know the state of the board right now. The Keepers, the invisible hand guiding the city for centuries, are just tearing themselves apart.
Completely fracturing.
And it's not some glorious ideological civil war either. It's an administrative collapse brought on by First Keeper Orland.
Oh, Orland. I mean, the man is the epitome of bureaucratic paranoia.
He really is.
Orland's descent is this fascinating study in the mechanics of a failing hierarchy. He inherits an order built on the principle of detached observation, right?
Right. Watch, but don't interfere.
Exactly. But he is fundamentally terrified of what he is observing. The prophecies are explicitly predicting a brethren and betrayer scenario.
Dark age for the Keepers.
Yeah. And instead of relying on the Order's traditional wisdom, Orland weaponizes his fear. He enacts a draconian lockdown, he silos information, initiates purges.
He just panics.
He absolutely panics. And the deployment of the enforcers isn't a strategic move. It's an autoimmune response. The Keepers are a dying body attacking its own healthy tissue.
We have to talk about those enforcers because they fundamentally break the rules of engagement in this city.
Oh, they change everything.
Garrett is used to city watch guards who, grumble about their boots and Hammerites who shout scripture before they swing their maces.
Right, people with predictable flaws.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He can manipulate their humanity. But the enforcers have no humanity to manipulate.
None at all.
They are telepathic assassins. They move with absolute physical silence, coordinating across vast distances without a single sound.
Operating purely on psychic synchronicity. It's terrifying.
Which begs the question, why does Garrett even stay?
Yeah, that is the big question.
Now, he's the ultimate pragmatist.
Yeah.
He walked away from the Keepers specifically to avoid this kind of apocalyptic drama.
He just wants to pay his rent.
Exactly. When telepathic assassins start hunting you, the logical move is to grab whatever loot you have stashed and put a continent between you and the city.
But he can't.
Right.
The illusion of Garrett's independence is finally shattering here. The Keepers aren't just a localized guild. Their influence is woven into the very masonry of the city.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
They control invisible thresholds, they manipulate the political economy, And their glyphs are embedded in the architecture of every district.
So running just isn't an option.
Right. Running is a geographical solution to an omnipresent problem. There is no physical boundary Garrett can cross that the Keepers haven't already charted.
Wow, yeah.
Furthermore, the framing of Garrett for the murder of Interpreter Caduca, that traps him ideologically.
Because he's the designated betrayer now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
As long as he is the designated betrayer in their prophecies, the machinery of the Order will never stop churning until he is dead.
So his only viable survival strategy is to subvert the prophecy by finding the actual traitor.
Precisely. He has to clear his name.
I do want to push back on Orland's responsibility here, though.
Oh.
Yeah, like, is Orland actually the architect of this collapse? Or is he just the predictable result of a flawed system?
That's a great point.
Because the Keepers have relied on archaic, rigid prophecies for hundreds of years. They essentially programmed themselves to self-destruct the moment the data became too terrifying to process.
Yeah, they painted themselves into a corner.
Right. Orland is incompetent, sure, but the entire Keeper philosophy is built on an arrogant assumption that they can decode the universe without ever getting their hands dirty.
That is a critical distinction. The Keepers treat the future as this, mathematical certainty that they alone have the right to interpret. And their reliance on the glyphs creates a massive cognitive blind spot. They stopped observing the present because they were entirely obsessed with reading the future.
That's so true.
When you build an institution entirely around abstract prophecy, a pragmatist like Orland, who, let's be honest, lacks the philosophical depth of his predecessors.
He's basically just a bureaucrat.
Right. He is going to treat those prophecies as literal assassination targets. The system was already fragile. Orland merely provided the sledgehammer.
And Garrett provides the wrecking ball. Literally.
Oh, the Clocktower, yes.
The sequence at the Stonemarket Clocktower is where the macro collapse of the Keepers intersects with Garrett's micro-survival instincts.
It's such a chaotic moment.
It really is. The Keepers believe the Clocktower is physically tied to the prophecy of time stopping. But Garrett, operating purely on chaotic pragmatism, decides to sabotage the clock mechanism to force the prophecy to execute prematurely.
He's trying to flush out the traitor.
Exactly. But instead, the structural integrity fails, and the entire massive tower collapses into the streets.
Just absolute devastation.
Yeah.
The collapse of the Clocktower is rich with symbolic resonance, but the physical aftermath is what really matters here.
The rubble.
Yeah, the sheer weight of the masonry, the gears, the ironwork crashes down, and the resulting rubble forms an unintentional, massive structural arrow.
It's crazy.
The debris points with brutal, unarguable precision directly toward the Hidden Keeper library.
The Keepers spent centuries hiding behind illusions and glyphs, and it took a catastrophic act of architectural destruction to expose them.
It really did.
But the thing is, it points the way. But the breadcrumbs inside that ruined library lead Garrett away from the sterile, intellectual threat of the Keepers and into something far more visceral.
Much darker.
Deciphering the ruined text and interrogating the sympathetic remnants of the Order points the finger at the traitor.
Right.
But the traitor is hiding in the city's blind spot, a location so deeply scarred that even the City Watch pretends it doesn't exist on the maps.
The Shalebridge Cradle.
The Shalebridge Cradle.
It really just looms over the narrative before you ever even see it.
Oh, absolutely.
You hear whispers about it from the criminal underworld. You see the superstitious dread it inspires in everyone.
Yeah.
And when we finally examine its history, the sociological nightmare becomes apparent. The Shalebridge Cradle was designed to be two completely incompatible institutions housed within the exact same structural footprint.
It's unbelievable.
It was an orphanage, and it was an asylum for the violently, criminally insane.
I mean, I cannot fathom the bureaucratic negligence required to sign off on that zoning permit.
It defies logic.
It really does.
Yeah.
You have the most impressionable, vulnerable, traumatized children in the city separated by mere floorboards and locked doors from the most dangerous, volatile, and deeply disturbed adults.
It's an astonishing recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I've heard it described as storing matches inside a fireworks factory.
Oh, that's the perfect analogy.
Right. The ambient psychological pressure cooker of that setup is staggering. You are packing explosive, unpredictable madness right next to fragile, terrified innocence.
Yeah, the kids would hear everything.
Exactly. The children would hear the screams from the treatment wards. The patients would hear the children playing or crying. The cross-contamination of trauma is baked into the very blueprint of the building.
And the architecture of the cradle was essentially a panopticon of suffering.
Yeah.
The treatment of the insane during this era of the city's history wasn't therapeutic, It was purely punitive.
Just punishment.
Right. We were talking about lobotomies, isolation chambers, electroshock mechanics, and brutal physical restraints.
Horrifying stuff.
The inmates were tortured under the guise of medicine, generating a massive reservoir of psychic agony.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, the orphans were subjected to neglect, fear, and the oppressive knowledge of what lived in the wings right next to them.
They knew what was on the other side of those walls.
Oh, they definitely knew. The emotional frequency of the entire building was dialed to absolute maximum terror every single day it operated.
And we actually have a primary source for this horror, right? Inspector Drept.
Drept, yes.
You know the Hammerites. They are stoic, unyielding zealots who view the world purely in terms of the builder's strict laws.
We don't bend.
They don't bend, and they certainly don't break. But when Garrett interrogates Drept, the hardened exterior completely shatters.
It really does.
Drept is a man who actively hunts heretics and monsters, yet the mere mention of the cradle reduces him to a trembling child.
Because Drept is the narrative anchor for the cradle's cruelty. He didn't experience it as an investigator, he survived it as an orphan.
Right. He was a kid there.
Exactly. The fanaticism he exhibits as an adult Hammerite is a direct psychological overcorrection for the total helplessness he experienced as a child in the cradle.
That makes so much sense.
He witnessed an entity, something he refers to as the hag within those walls. The trauma didn't just scar him, it fundamentally rewired his existence.
It drove him into the religion.
Yeah, driving him into the rigid, absolute structure of the Hammerite religion just to feel a semblance of safety.
Wow. Well, the functional existence of the cradle ended exactly how anyone would predict.
The pressure cooker detonated.
It detonated. A catastrophic fire swept through the building. And the details are just grim.
So grim.
The structural layout that was meant to keep the inmates isolated ended up functioning as a literal death trap.
Yeah, they couldn't get out.
Patients were locked in their cells, orphans were trapped in their dormitories, the doors sealed, the roof collapsed, and hundreds of souls burned alive in a confined space.
Just unimaginable horror.
From a civic standpoint, the cradle was destroyed. It became a burned-out shell.
But, and this is the key, the physical destruction of the building was actually the catalyst for its supernatural genesis.
Right.
This is where the physics of architectural memory execute their most terrifying function. The sheer density of the agony released during the fire didn't dissipate.
The collective terror of the children, the uncomprehending panic of the inmates.
Exactly. The extreme heat acted as a crucible. The fire fused that psychic energy into the charred masonry.
Wow.
The building didn't die. The fire shocked it into sentience.
And I think we need to be really precise about what kind of sentient we're talking about here.
Yes, it's very specific.
I don't believe the cradle is a calculated, scheming villain like Orland or the Hag.
No, not at all.
I think the cradle is trapped in an eternal state of a panic attack.
Ooh, a panic attack. I like that description.
It woke up during the worst trauma imaginable, right? And its consciousness is entirely composed of the terror of its inhabitants burning to death.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily evil, it's just completely insane, and it lashes out at anything that enters because it is permanently reliving the moment of its own destruction.
That is a highly plausible mechanical explanation. It operates less like a demon and more like a traumatized immune system.
Immune system, yes.
When the building gained this horrific consciousness, its first and only directive was retention.
Hold on to everything.
Right? It remembers every single entity that died within it. The inmates, the orphans, the guards, they are all permanently logged into the cradle's memory banks. And its defining rule is absolute containment. Nothing that crosses its threshold is ever permitted to leave.
And this shifts the entire paradigm of the universe for Garrett. The listener really needs to understand how radically the rules change the moment Garrett steps through those rusted outer gates.
It's a completely different game now.
Garrett defines himself through control. He chooses his points of entry. He reads patrol routes. He understands the mechanics of locks, shadows, and human greed.
He's a predator.
Right. He is a predator who dictates the terms of the hunt. But the cradle doesn't have patrol routes or locks that matter. The moment he enters, The narrative strips him of his agency.
It does. Garrett's reliance on his environment is completely inverted.
Yeah.
He usually uses the architecture against his human enemies, hiding in rafters, exploiting dark corners. But in the Cradle, the architecture is the enemy.
The building is fighting him.
Exactly. There is no wealthy noble to outsmart. There is no tangible loot that holds any value. He is infiltrating a localized nightmare purely to extract data.
It's a survival horror endurance test.
And that transition forces Garrett to confront his own profound vulnerability.
The sensory design of this space is a weapon. As Garrett pushes deeper, he actually breaks character.
He talks to himself.
Yes, this arrogant, unfazable master thief actually stops and mutters to himself. He says, "I'm used to the dark, but this feels like a house with bad dreams."
Such a powerful line.
For Garrett to vocalize his unease is the ultimate signal to the audience that the conventional mechanics of his world no longer apply. The dark isn't his ally here, it's a hostile organism.
The soundscape functions as the primary mechanism of psychological warfare here. The Cradle doesn't rely on cheap visual jump scares. It relies on sensory distortion.
Oh, the audio is incredible.
As Garrett moves, the building physically reacts. You don't just hear ambient wind. You hear the structural groans of charred timber that sound organically similar to a massive creature breathing.
Yes, the breathing building.
You hear the sudden, violent rattling of an isolation door at the end of an empty hallway. You hear overlapping distant whispers and sobbing.
It's so unnerving.
The building is constantly indicating that it knows Garrett is there. It is evaluating him, reacting to his presence like a foreign body.
Which brings us to the white blood cells of this horrific immune system, right? The puppets.
Oh, the puppets.
We have to dissect the nature of the enemies wandering these halls because they are a complete departure from anything else in the city.
Totally different.
They aren't guards doing a job. They are the physical remains of the asylum inmates, reanimated by the will of the building. But it's not necromancy in the traditional spellcasting sense.
No, it's closer to a neurological hijack. The puppets are the burned corpses of the patients.
Still in their straitjackets.
Still bound in their rusted straitjackets. Many still wear the heavy iron cages locked around their heads, which are, relics of brutal treatments.
Yeah.
The Cradle isn't reviving their souls. It is simply animating their charred musculature using the ambient psychic energy.
That is so gross, but so fascinating.
This is why their movement is so profoundly disturbing. They don't walk with purpose. They twitch.
They spasm.
Violently, lurching forward in unnatural, jerky motions as if an invisible puppeteer is yanking their limbs through a crude nervous system.
The visual is harrowing, but the auditory component is what locks it in your memory forever.
The muttering.
Yeah, they don't have battle cries. They wander the flickering corridors, muttering fragmented, distorted phrases from their past lives.
Yes, sleep.
Right. They repeat things the doctors told them, or they scream about the fire. It's an endless, looping playback of their final tortured moments.
And when they detect Garrett,
Oh, man.
their spasms accelerate into a terrifying, erratic sprint. It's nightmare fuel.
The thematic resonance is heavy here, too.
Oh, very much so.
The puppets represent the absolute destruction of autonomy. In their physical lives, these individuals were institutionalized, stripped of their legal agency, and subjected to the total control of the asylum staff.
They were locked away and experimented on.
Exactly. Now, in death, they are denied the oblivion of the grave. Their physical forms are hijacked, entirely subjugated to the will of the sentient architecture.
It's a brilliant, terrifying mirror held up to Garrett.
Because Garrett's entire ethos is autonomy.
Exactly. Garrett rejected the Keepers because he refused to be an instrument of their prophecies. He operates outside the law because he refuses to be governed.
He values his freedom above all else.
His ultimate fear isn't death or even poverty. His ultimate fear is subjugation.
Right.
The Cradle presents him with the exact fate he has spent his life running from. If he fails here, he doesn't just die.
He joins them.
The building absorbs him. He becomes another twitching appendage of the Cradle, his autonomy erased forever.
So, navigating this sensory hellscape, managing the erratic threats of the puppets, Garrett descends to the core of the Cradle's memory.
He's searching for the truth behind Drept's trauma.
Right. He isn't looking for a physical file. He's looking for the residual memory of the event. And what he finds is a localized anomaly within the Cradle system.
The spirit.
He finds the spirit of a little girl named Lauryl.
Laurel's presence is distinct from the other spirits or the puppets, though.
Yeah, how so?
Well, she isn't an artifact of the fire. She isn't a former patient or a resident orphan who died in the disaster.
Right, her timeline is different.
Her spirit is trapped in the cradle because her blood was spilled there long after the building was abandoned.
She was murdered there.
Yes, she was murdered within the ruins, and the trauma of that specific violent act tethered her soul to the building's ravenous memory.
It is through interacting with Laurel's trapped spirit that the massive conspiracy finally unwinds. Lauryl provides the eyewitness testimony to her own murder.
The missing puzzle piece.
She tells Garrett about the monster that killed her, the same entity Drept witnessed as a child, the Hag.
The Hag.
And the revelation of the Hag's true identity completely recontextualizes everything we know about the Keepers. The Hag is Gamall.
The revelation that Gamall is the Hag is a structural masterpiece of the narrative.
It blew my mind.
To understand the gravity of this, we really must examine who Gamall appears to be. In the Keeper library, Gamall is the translator. She presents as a quiet, pale, deeply unsettling little girl who sits beside interpreter Kaduka.
Yeah, just reading texts.
She is the conduit through which the raw data of the glyphs is translated into actionable prophecy. She's positioned as an innocent prodigy, groomed for the highest echelons of Keeper leadership.
But the biological reality of what Gamall actually is defies human comprehension. She isn't a prodigy. She isn't even human.
Not even close.
Gamall is an ancient parasitic entity, a creature deeply rooted in the folklore of the city, whispered about in nursery rhymes to frighten children.
The boogeyman.
Exactly. And she has survived through the centuries via a method of camouflage that is viscerally revolting.
Yes.
She hunts young girls, murders them, and then literally physically hollows out their bodies to wear their skin.
The mechanics of her disguise are horrifying. It's not an illusion. It's not a glamour cast by magic. It is a literal, physical skin suit.
A skin suit.
She compresses her ancient, monstrous form into the dermis of a murdered child, allowing her to operate in broad daylight right in the center of the city's most secretive and secure order.
It's disgusting.
And Lauryl was simply her latest acquisition. Gamall murdered Lauryl in the abandoned cradle, took her skin, and walked into the Keeper compound, masquerading as an orphaned prodigy.
I have to challenge the premise of the Keeper's competence here, though.
Go for it.
Because this is the breaking point for me regarding their entire organization. You have a society of obsessive observers.
Right.
These are people who read the microscopic shifts in the city's balance, who use glyphs to see through walls, who claim to hold omniscient knowledge over the criminal and political underworlds.
Supposedly, yes.
How is it mechanically possible that an ancient, skin-stealing folklore monster sat at their primary reading table for years, and not a single Keeper noticed that the little girl was actually a rotting skin suit?
It's crazy.
It implies a level of incompetence that is almost comical.
It does highlight a catastrophic failure, but I would argue it's not a failure of raw intelligence. It is a failure of epistemology.
How so?
The Keepers failed because of how they define truth. They rely entirely on macro data. They look at the grand, sweeping arcs of time, reading the prophecies to predict the fall of empires or the rise of dark ages.
Yeah.
When you are constantly staring at the horizon with a telescope, you are functionally blind to the scorpion crawling up your leg.
Wow. They relied so heavily on the system, the magic, the glyphs, the prophecies, that they stopped looking at the physical reality in the room with them.
Precisely. Gamall understood the Keepers better than they understood themselves.
She used their hubris.
She knew they were arrogant. She knew that if she presented herself as an innocent, traumatized child with an inherent gift for translating glyphs, they wouldn't interrogate her physical nature.
They would only see her utility.
Gamall essentially hacked their bureaucracy. By becoming the translator, she positioned herself at the very choke point of their information flow.
She controlled what they saw.
Exactly. She was feeding them the prophecies, subtly manipulating the translations to steer the order toward paranoia and collapse.
That's how she got Orland to panic.
Right. She orchestrated the murder of Kaduka, framed Garrett, and triggered Orland's lockdown, all from the safety of her chair in the library. She used their absolute faith in prophecy as the weapon to destroy them.
So Garrett has the complete picture. The puzzle is solved. He knows Gamall is the Hag, he understands how she manipulated the Keepers, and he has the evidence to clear his name.
He has the data.
He possesses the data required to save the city. But acquiring the data is only half the problem. The secondary issue is that he is standing deep inside the digestive tract of a sentient asylum.
Yeah, getting out is the hard part.
You can't just unpick a lock and walk out the front door of the Shalebridge Cradle.
The mechanics of the Cradle's sentience prevent a physical exit. As we established, the building operates on a mandate of retention.
Right, nothing leaves.
Once you are inside, the Cradle processes you. It remembers Garrett now. In the psychological architecture of the space, Garrett has been categorized.
He's on the census.
He is an inmate. The heavy iron doors at the entrance aren't locked by mechanisms that a thief can pick. They are sealed by the localized reality the Cradle enforces.
Yeah.
To the building, Garrett leaving is as impossible as a memory deleting itself.
This is where Garrett executes one of the most brilliant, desperate maneuvers in the entire lore. He realizes he cannot fight the building physically.
Oh.
He can't pick a lock and he can't kill a wall. He has to attack the building's operating system.
The memory itself.
He has to manipulate the Cradle's memory. If the building is a sentient entity driven by trauma and memory, Garrett determines he must trick that memory to alter his classification from living inmate to deceased patient.
It's a profound exploitation of the building's internal logic.
It really is.
Garrett locates a cage within the facility that acts as a conduit to the past. It's a sort of localized temporal anomaly where the Cradle's memory of the time before the fire is strongest.
A memory state.
He steps into this memory state, projecting his consciousness into the historical version of the asylum. But he isn't there to observe. He is there to insert a false data point into the building's history.
He climbs to the highest accessible point in this historical projection of the Cradle. And then he jumps out the window.
He simulates a suicide.
He literally commits a fake suicide to trick a haunted asylum into taking him off the active census.
It is an agonizingly clever solution. The Cradle only releases its active, hostile grip on those who are dead.
Because the dead belong to the memory, not the physical present.
By throwing himself out of the window in the memory state, Garrett effectively writes his own death certificate into the building's ledger. He convinces the sentience of the Cradle that he perished from the fall.
It's absurd, but within the physics of this nightmare, it is the only logical solution.
The logic holds. The Cradle's sentience registers his death. Because he is no longer classified as a living threat attempting to escape, the building's immune response ceases.
The pressure lifts.
The intense, localized pressure lifts, allowing his physical body to transition back to the present reality without the building actively fighting to crush him. He exploits a glitch in the haunting.
But the escape isn't purely selfish. He cannot leave Lauryl behind.
No, her spirit is still trapped.
Her spirit is still actively being digested by the Cradle's memory. Garrett has to perform a physical override to sever her connection to the building. And this introduces a really fascinating mechanic regarding how Keeper magic interacts with physical substances.
The binding of Lauryl wasn't just a byproduct of her murder, right? It was an intentional magical tether.
Right.
Gamall, utilizing her stolen Keeper knowledge, painted specific glyphs on Laurel's personal belongings left in the Cradle.
As anchors.
These glyphs functioned as anchors, locking the child's soul to the physical location of her death, ensuring she could never leave to expose Gamall's crime.
So Garrett retrieves a vial of Laurel's own dried blood from the scene of the murder. And he uses the victim's blood to physically wash away the painted glyphs.
Yeah.
Why does this work? My theory is that glyph magic is fundamentally a system of abstract representation. A glyph represents a concept.
Okay, I track.
That blood, specifically the blood of the victim, is the ultimate physical truth of the crime. The raw biological reality of the blood overpowers and short-circuits the abstract magic of the glyph.
That is a solid mechanical interpretation. Keeper magic relies on order, structure, and intent.
Right.
The blood introduces raw, chaotic, undeniable reality. When Garrett applies the blood to the glyphs, it isn't just erasing chalk, it is breaking the arcane circuit.
The tether snaps?
The magical tether snaps. Spirit is violently decoupled from the Cradle's memory, finally granting her the peace of oblivion.
And the cascading effect of that severed tether is instantaneous. Across the city, deep within the Hidden Keeper library, the physics of Gamall's disguise fail. Because the magic hiding Laurel's murder is broken, the skin suit constructed from Laurel's body can no longer sustain its form.
The unmasking is explosive. Imagine the scene in the library.
Oh, man.
You have First Keeper Orland, his enforcers, and the remaining scholars. These arrogant, terrified men who believe they control the fate of the cities.
Sitting there in their sanctuary.
Sitting among them is the quiet, pale translator. And suddenly, the skin suit ruptures.
Just tears apart.
Right in the center of their sanctuary, the little girl violently expands, tearing apart, morphing back into the massive, horrific, ancient reality of the Hag.
The psychological shock must have been paralyzing. The Keepers thought their enemy was Garrett, a cynical thief operating in the shadows.
Yeah.
Instead, the ultimate threat was sitting in their favorite chair reading their most sacred texts. Gamall doesn't attempt to negotiate or flee either. She drops the infiltration tactic entirely and transitions to sheer brute force slaughter.
The rampage is absolute. Gamall slaughters her way through the scholars.
The enforcers try to fight back, right?
The enforcers, who are trained to hunt human thieves, are utterly unequipped to fight an ancient entity of raw power.
They don't stand a chance.
And in the chaos, she corners First Keeper Orland, the supreme bureaucrat. The man whose paranoia dismantled the Keeper's defenses is brutally murdered by the very monster he was too blind to see.
It is a poetic, horrific justice.
It really.
With her cover blown, Gamall shifts to her endgame. She realizes she can no longer manipulate the Order from the shadows, so she decides to conquer the city in the light.
She goes for the artifact.
She steals the core Keeper artifacts, the chalice, the crown, the most potent focuses of their magic. She intends to rewrite the glyphs of the city to serve her, ensuring that no Keeper, Hammerite, or thief can ever challenge her dominion.
This initiates the final, desperate sprint of the narrative.
Yeah.
Garrett, having just survived the psychological meat grinder of the Shalebridge Cradle, emerges into a city that is rapidly descending into apocalyptic chaos.
It's all falling apart.
The Hag's statues are animating, her power is surging through the districts, and the Keeper Order is utterly decimated.
Garrett realizes that conventional theft or assassination won't work on an entity like Gamall. The only way to stop a creature exploiting the city's magical infrastructure is to crash the entire system.
Unplug the machine.
Exactly. He has to race to the Wieldstrom Museum. He needs to steal the final specific artifacts required to activate the ultimate failsafe. The Final Glyph.
The Final Glyph is the Keeper's self-destruct button.
Yeah.
Activating it doesn't just kill Gamall, it systematically erases all glyph magic from the world. It strips the Keepers of their power, destroys their hidden doors, erases their prophecies, and permanently dismantles their ability to secretly govern the city.
It sets up an incredibly dense philosophical dilemma for you to chew on as we wrap up today.
Oh, it's a big one.
Garrett is racing to activate this final glyph to save his own life and stop the Hag. But consider the macro implications. For centuries, the Keeper's magic, as arrogant and flawed as their leadership was, acted as the secret mortar holding the city together.
The stabilizers.
Right. They maintained the delicate, bloody balance between the fanaticism of the Hammerites, the chaos of the pagans, and the corruption of the City Watch.
It forces us to confront the terrifying nature of absolute freedom.
Yes.
If Garrett succeeds, he stops the immediate monster. But by erasing the glyphs, he removes the invisible stabilizers of society.
Cool. What happens next?
Exactly. What happens to an ecosystem that has been secretly managed for hundreds of years when the managers suddenly vanish?
When the safety net of prophecy and control is burned away, does the city thrive in its new autonomy? Or does it simply tear itself apart without the Keepers there to enforce the balance? You amputate the infected limb to save the patient, but he might just bleed out anyway. It's the ultimate consequence of destroying a flawed system without a replacement ready.
You break the chains, but you also shatter the foundation.
Until next time, watch your step, stay out of the light, and remember, the archives never close.